Hello everyone, competition in this world manifests in everything, and it is primarily the reason for technological advancements. This includes the construction of automobiles. One of the well-known car brands that became popular and developed quite well thanks to competition is Pontiac. Pontiac is a car manufacturer that is part of the General Motors Group, which also produces Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac brands. However, Pontiac ended its long journey by ceasing car production in 2010. Pontiac cars began production in 1926, and they were named after the Ottawa Chief. The city of Pontiac in Michigan, where the cars were produced, is also named after him. Initially, Pontiac was a creation of the Oakland Company, and the cars were very similar to the Chevrolet models of the 1920s, featuring 6-cylinder engines. The body styles included sedan, convertible, landau, and coupe. Pontiac cars were produced with 40 horsepower engines of 186 cubic inches, 3.1 liters, and inline 6-cylinder engines. In 1927, 39,000 cars were sold, and in 1926, 76,000 cars were sold. Later, the engine was upgraded, and they started producing an inline 8-cylinder engine, based on the same principle as the Chevrolet Master engine. In 1934, only an 8-cylinder engine with 77 horsepower was available. Pontiac started using the Buick Torpedo body and later the design of Chevrolet cars. On exhibition models, the Buick Torpedo, combined with Pontiac, had a feature where pressing a button would open the front half of the body, revealing the engine, interior, and seats. In 1937, Pontiac models switched to B-class bodies with an X-frame and Hotchkiss drive. In the 1940s, Pontiac was built on 3 different bodies: the A body from Chevrolet, the B body shared with Oldsmobile and Buick, and the C body for the large Oldsmobile, Buick, and small Cadillac. In 1941, all Pontiac models were named Torpedo. In 1942, Pontiac fully transitioned to military production, and no civilian cars were produced. Pontiac was always an affordable and simple car. The inline engine required less production costs than the V8 engine. The inline engine was heavier and longer, but not particularly powerful. The crankshaft of such long engines often experienced high loads and failed. From 1946 to 1954, new Pontiac models were the same old models from 1942 with minor modifications. In 1948, the Hydromatic automatic transmission was installed. Updated models appeared in 1949, including the Pontiac Silver Streak convertible and coupe. The new lineup on the replaced Torpedo body, Chieftain, built on the GM body platform, differed in style from the more conservative Streamliner. In 1950, the Catalina Pontiac was introduced in a coupe body, along with the new Chevrolet Bel Air model. The 1953 models were the first to feature one-piece windshields instead of the usual 2-section ones. However, all the redesigns of the updated models also affected sales, as there were competitors like Buick, which released a car with a new V8 engine that year. Pontiac released even newer updated models in the 1955 to 1960s, such as the 1955 Pontiac Star Chief or the 1956 Pontiac Pathfinder. During these years, Pontiac introduced its V8 engine and stopped producing cars with 6-cylinder engines. The model range also included 4-cylinder engines, such as in the Tempest models from 1961. The 4-cylinder engine was also installed on the Pontiac Firebird from 1967 to 2002. In 1957, the Bonneville convertible Star Chief was released. The Bonneville car became iconic in the USA, the #1 road car in America. The design and the style of Native Americans with long stripes and shiny moldings was gradually abandoned. Only hints remained on the dashboard. As the years went by, there was less and less Native American design in Pontiac cars. This is what the 1959 Pontiac Bonneville looks like: unusual rear fins. The design of all Pontiacs gradually transitioned to square headlights. Bonneville became the top model in the Pontiac lineup. The sedan and hatchback models of Catalina included a 2-door sedan with a hardtop, a 4-door sedan, a 4-door station wagon with 6 passengers, and one with 9 passengers. All 1959 Pontiac engines were equipped with a 389 cubic inch engine with a rated power from 215 horsepower to an economical 3-cylinder carburetor engine with 345 horsepower. The automatic transmissions had 4 speeds. This gearbox was called Hydra-matic. The models in 1969 gradually began to lose their style. The rear fins remained more or less similar. The body kits, however, Pontiac retained its own style of the front and rear parts, interiors, and engines in 1970. In 1964, the Pontiac Bonneville was different, but most Pontiac models were still partially copied from their related brands in the General Motors workshop, except for Cadillac. Of course, the models of the 1960s were redesigned with a split grille and new bodies. Chevrolet still used the X-frame in parallel. By the end of the 60s, cars were already being built not on a frame, but on the body itself. The engine was mounted on the body. For example, cars that received the name Y platform or Y body. The models changed slightly. For example, the Pontiac Tempest of 1961 to 1963 and the Buick Special of 1961 to 1963. The 1963 Pontiac Le Mans was already an unequal passenger car, making the car significantly lighter. Pontiac, of course, had muscle cars, that is, muscular cars. One of them is the Pontiac GTO. It was widely recognized as the first muscle car, became an iconic series of cars, and had several generations of production from 1964 to 1974 and from 2004 to 2006. All these Pontiacs already had an engine in the front and rear-wheel drive on a frameless body. They had a very large transmission bridge. The weight distribution was 50-50. The car became balanced, but the drawback was that there was a hump in the rear floor, inside which the transmission bridge passed. The engine on the Pontiac Tempest was called the Pontiac 389 V8, but there was also a 4-cylinder engine. Pontiac was still more inclined to produce the Pontiac Tempest of 1964 to 1965 with a powerful V8 engine. It so happened that powerful engines were in greater demand for some reason. The car named GTO. The abbreviation simply stands for Gran Turismo Omologato. Gran Turismo is a car designed for high speed and long distance travel thanks to a combination of performance and luxury attributes. In other words, it is a luxurious low coupe. The Pontiac GTO convertible of 1969. In 1967, a new production car, the Pontiac Firebird, was introduced. The Firebird was a variant of the Chevrolet Camaro models. It was, so to speak, a competitive response to the Ford Mustang models of those years. The engine was a V8 with a volume of 6.5 liters. The engine in these models was called ram air, meaning cold air was forcibly blown in to increase engine power. The cooled air was fed into the carburetor, making the engine even more powerful. The setup of 3 carburetors was called tri-power. In 1969, Pontiac came up with a new G body style. The style of this body was such that the hood was long, but the wheelbase was short, like a hatchback or Gran Turismo coupe. That is, the cars were planned to be made as individual luxury cars, similar to cars like the Buick Riviera or Ford Thunderbird. Pontiac wanted to have a similar lineup of cars. Pontiacs built in the late 1960s met the new federal motor vehicle safety standards in the USA. Everything was updated: steering, hydraulic brakes, dual circuit seat belts, marker lights, headrests, everything was up to the new safety standards. The 1969 Firebird was slightly updated, but generally resembled the 1967 model. In the early 80s, until 1982, Pontiac's main slogan became safety and economy. The era of these huge 6.5-liter engines came to an end. In mid-1971, Pontiac introduced the compact and affordable Ventura 2, based on the third-generation Chevrolet Nova. The stylish look was replaced by the Granville model. Pontiac Safari vans had a feature of retractable rear doors and seats to turn the car into a sleeping place. Full-size station wagons from 1971 to 1976 had a folding design where the rear window with a mechanical drive slid up the roof and the rear door manually or with a power assist lowered below the cargo floor. In 1973, Pontiac restyled the Grand Prix, Ventura, and Le Mans models and came up with new models for 1973, the Pontiac Grandin. Again, power dropped on all engines due to additional emission requirements. In the same 1973, a new engine, the Super Duty 455, was introduced. It was more or less a racing engine as it had a very large displacement. the federal emissions law came into effect, and engines with a displacement of 455 cubic inches, 7.2 liters, fell into decline. They had to be either upgraded or reduced in volume to avoid polluting the environment. In 1975, Pontiac introduced a new compact model, the Astra, a version of the Chevrolet Vega, a car with a small, economical engine. The 1976 models were the last of the traditional American big cars, mostly equipped with large V8 engines. The 1975 Granville was the last full-size convertible built by Pontiac. The 1976 Sunbird also joined this model. The Sunbird Safari wagon was produced until 1979. In mid-1977, Pontiac introduced the new Phoenix, a high-end version of the Ventura, which completely replaced the Ventura after the end of 1977. A new engine called the Iron Duke with a volume of 2.4 liters was introduced in 1977. It began to be installed on many Pontiac cars, as well as other General Motors brands. The new Bonneville and Catalina from 1977 continued to be bestsellers, although some buyers viewed their stylistic similarity to the Chevrolet Caprice as a cheapening of Pontiac's image. In 1981, the full-size Bonneville was discontinued. The Firebird remained a popular model, largely due to the film Smokey and the Bandit, a comedy that gave popularity to the Firebird. In 1982, the Firebird was redesigned and released with a wedge-shaped body. The wedge-shaped body brought enough success to the company. This body shape and wedge-shaped front end were liked by buyers. Then came the 1984 Fiero. In 1984, the Special Touring Edition, STE, was added to the 6000 lineup as a competitor to European road cars such as the Mercedes 190. This car had upgraded electronics in the cabin and other features. Later models even had an anti-lock braking system, but other buyers were upset that in 1984 they could no longer buy a new large Bonneville car, and Pontiac decided to import the Pontiac Parisienne to the US market. And just imagine a 1987 car that looked like a 1960s car, but people still felt nostalgic for it, while Mercedes bodies had long since taken on more modern forms. All Pontiacs, except for the Safari, Fiero, and Firebird, were switched to front-wheel drive platforms in 1988. In the 1970s, Pontiac became the third most popular car manufacturer in the USA. From 1989 to 1997, Pontiac cars featured anti-lock braking systems, airbags, and the GMQ4 engine. Cars used composite materials in the dashboards. In 1989, production of the Safari station wagon was discontinued, making it the last full-size rear-wheel drive Pontiac with a V8. The Grand Prix lineup added the first four-door model in history, offered in LE and SE trims. At the end of 1991, production of the 6000 model was discontinued in favor of the new expanded Grand Prix lineup and the new Transport minivan, which replaced the 6000 station wagon. In 1992, a completely new Bonneville was introduced. It already had front-wheel drive, a V6 engine with 205 horsepower, and a turbocharger. The completely new Firebird was introduced in 1993. It was equipped with either a 3.4-liter V6 with 160 horsepower or 275 horsepower, or a 5.7-liter V8 with 350 horsepower. The transmission was 6-speed. Sunbird was replaced, still on the G-body, by the Sunfire in 1995, while the V6 engine was no longer available on the J platform. In 1996, the Bonneville received updated front and rear panels, as well as a number of other improvements. The 3800 Series 2 V6 became standard in 1995, producing 200 horsepower. The updated 3800 Series 2 with a supercharger now has 240 horsepower. It was equipped with either a 3.4-liter V6 with 160 horsepower or a 5.7-liter V8 with 350 horsepower, and could be equipped with a 6-speed manual transmission. In 1996, a new Grand Prix car was released with a 3.8-liter V6 engine producing 240 horsepower. In 1998, the Firebird was updated and received an engine with 305 horsepower. The WS6 variant allowed this number to be increased to 320 horsepower. A Ram Air engine with cold air induction was installed. In 2004, the GTO was initially equipped with a 350 horsepower V8. It had independent front and rear suspension and a high-quality, fully leather interior. Its sales did not reach even 18,000 units, as predicted by General Motors. LS1 engine was discontinued in 2004. A new LS2 V8 engine with 400 horsepower was introduced on the new 2005 to 2006 models. Later, the old V6 engine was modified, making it new with a supercharger, a volume of 3.8 liters, and now it has 260 horsepower. In 2000, the Pontiac Bonneville received its first major redesign since 1992 and was based on the G-body platform shared with the Oldsmobile Aurora and Buick LeSabre. In 2002, the Firebird and Camaro were discontinued due to declining sales and a saturated sports car market. The Pontiac Bonneville was discontinued in 2005 after nearly 50 years of production. As a roadster, Pontiac released the Solstice in 2002, and within a few months, a hardtop coupe, which is considered quite rare as only 1,266 coupes were produced. The controversial and slow-selling Aztek was finally discontinued and replaced by the Pontiac Torrent, which was identical to the Chevrolet Equinox. The LS4 V8 engine, which produced 303 horsepower, was retained for the G8 GXP, which was the most powerful production car ever made by Pontiac. In the end, Pontiac as a brand was liquidated along with Hummer. The liquidation of Pontiac was due to the growing threat of bankruptcy. As a result, the brands Chevrolet, Cadillac, Buick, and GMC remained. On April 27, 2009, GM announced that Pontiac would be discontinued and that all its remaining models would be phased out by the end of 2010. Between 7,000 and 8,000 jobs were lost at factories in the United States. Until 1956, the logo, badge, on Pontiac was in the form of an Indian headdress arrow, and the emblem itself was nothing more than an Indian arrow. From its inception in the 1950s until the early 1970s, Pontiac engines were known for their performance. The largest engine was the massive V8 with a volume of 455 cubic inches, which was available in most mid-size, full-size, and sports car models. For many years, Pontiac used single-barrel Carter carburetors. Later, V8 engines were equipped with two-barrel carburetors. They were also the basis for tri-power setups on engines. The tri-power setup included one central carburetor with idle control and two end carburetors that did not engage until the throttle was open more than halfway. Later, quadrajet, four-barrel carburetors were installed. Its first application was the Chevy 396C engine, released in 1965. It was used on Cadillac Brougham station wagons and full-size station wagons produced by Chevrolet, Pontiac, and Buick. Quadrajet carburetors were installed until 1990. When electronic fuel injection appeared, carburetors were no longer needed due to fuel economy and high exhaust emissions. Here is a list of Pontiac models throughout the brand's history. Pontiac 2+2, 1964 to 1970. Pontiac 1000, 1983 to 1987. Pontiac 2000 Sunbird, 1983 to 1984. Pontiac 6000, 1982 to 1991. Pontiac Acadian, 1976 to 1987. Pontiac Astra, 1975 to 1977. Pontiac Aztek, 2001 to 2005. Pontiac Bonneville, 1957 to 2005. Pontiac Catalina, 1959 to 1981. Pontiac Chieftain, 1949 to 1958. Pontiac Custom S, 1969. Pontiac Deluxe, 1937. Pontiac Executive, 1967 to 1970. Pontiac Fiero, 1984 to 1988. Pontiac Firebird, 1967 to 2002. Pontiac Firefly, 1985 to 2001. Pontiac G3, G4, G5, G6, and G8. Pontiac G GT37, 1970 to 1971, Pontiac Grand Am, Pontiac Grand Prix, 1962 to 2008, Pontiac Grand Safari, 1971 to 1978, Pontiac Grand Ville, 1971 to 1975, Pontiac Grand Parisienne, 1966 to 1969, Pontiac GTO, 1964 to 1974, Pontiac Laurentian, 1955 to 1981, Pontiac Le Mans, 1962 to 1981, Pontiac Montana, 1999 to 2005, Pontiac Montana SV6, 2005 to 2006, Pontiac Phoenix, 1977 to 1984, Pontiac Pathfinder, 1955 to 1958, Pontiac Pursuit, 2005 to 2006, Pontiac Safari, 1955 to 1989, Pontiac Silver Streak, Pontiac Solstice, 2006 to 2009, Pontiac Star Chief, 1954 to 1966, Pontiac Strato Chief, 1955 to 1970, Pontiac Streamliner, 1942 to 1951, Pontiac Sunbird, 1975 to 1980, Pontiac Sunfire, 1995 to 2005, Pontiac Sunrunner, 1994 to 1997, Pontiac Super Chief, 1957 to 1958, Pontiac T37, 1970 to 1971, Pontiac Tempest, 1961 to 1970, 1987 to 1990, Pontiac Torpedo, 1940 to 1948, Pontiac Torrent, 2006 to 2009, Pontiac Trans Am, 1969 to 2002, Pontiac Ventura, 1960 to 1970, Pontiac Ventura 2, 1971 to 1972, Pontiac Vibe, 2003 to 2010, Pontiac Wave, 2004 to 2010. This is the history of Pontiac, which had its own designers, shared engines with other brands like Chevrolet and Buick, and had much in common with Cadillac. However, Pontiac earned its place in the history of beautiful cars. That's all for now. Give it a thumbs up, thank you.